You're listening to the Mind Flipping Podcast, where you'll find tools and tips to help you renovate and update your mind and life.
Richard, thanks so much for being on the Mind Flipping Podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, and as we chatted a little bit before we clicked record, we both are working maybe through a little bit of cold, so a little thank you to you for hopping in despite this that you're working through, and a pre-apology to our audience for any coughs, sniffles, gravelly voices.
Yep.
So as I told our listeners in the intro, we met almost a year ago. Coming up this summer, it'll be a year ago.
Right.
We did some training together, and I loved what I got to learn about you, your passions about helping people with addictions, opioid addictions, your passions in sales. You know, we both have been in business for a while and like to demystify the sales process, and hypnosis and mindfulness and so many other things. So as you know, this is the Mind Flipping Podcast, and it's about renovating and updating our minds, our lives. What are you passionate about lately? What's happening in your life related to mind flipping?
Well, I became certified with a company called the Harrison Assessments. And what makes this unique is I do a lot of emotional intelligence assessments at the corporate level and at the personal level. At Harrison, it was introduced to me while I was writing my dissertation about 5 years ago. And it was intriguing, but it was too much for me on my plate at the time. So I told the gentleman, I said, I really like what I'm hearing. I don't have the bandwidth to work with you. Finished the dissertation, got the doctorate, built up my business, and it was time for me to reach out to him.
Okay. How did that happen? Why was it time?
Because the tools I had were insufficient for me to go forward.
Okay.
Let me explain why. Through this opioid crisis process, I started writing grants to the government to research what's the causation of an addiction and what is the definition of addiction. Because I believe the way we're going right now isn't necessarily a pathway of success. In that process, I came across this assessment, Harrison, as I mentioned, that allows me on paper to predict an addiction. Yeah, raise that eyes. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So I'm able to sit now. Let's just use a couple coaching for an example. If I'm sitting with Mr. and Mrs. Brown and I do their assessment, what would normally take me anywhere from 3 to 6 90-minute sessions to determine a behavior trait, because they're always going to be on their best behavior with me.
Right.
They come in there. They don't act the same when I'm in the room that when I'm not in the room.
Right.
Now I have on paper their own answers, and I can simply look at them and say, in this particular area, it's called paradoxical traits. A paradox is what seems to be two contradictory behaviors that are, in fact, complementary, such as tough and love, right? So what would it be like if you grew up in an environment where your dad was nothing but tough, always enforcing the rules, right? Pounding on you. What would then be like if all your mom was love? No rules. You see, your dad's got a skill. He knows how to enforce necessary rules, but he doesn't have the compensating skill of showing forth an increase of understanding or love. Your mother's got a skill that is understanding and love, but she doesn't have the compensating skill of enforcing the rules. So they each have a singular skill. A balanced behavior, one not in an addictive or a maladaptive position, has all 3 skills. 1 + 1 = 3. I can be tough when needed. I can show an increase of understanding and love when needed. But you know what? I can do them both. Now, I've got 12 paradoxes. And when I work with a client, whether it be at the corporate level, individual level, or in a family scenario, I have it in black and white. Well, it's color, but as a metaphor, black and white.
Yeah.
And I'll simply say, okay, Mr. Smith, it appears that your preferred behavior is to be quite blunt on a day-to-day basis. Is that true? Now, if his bride is sitting there and he denies it, eyes are rolling.
Right.
Right. So what happens now is I can cut through up to a month to 2 months worth of visits and time in a singular assessment. And the predictable aspects of this process is when you are triggered and or flooded, and those are two different meanings.
Okay.
Triggered means there's a bogey on the radar, right? Something's going on in your space that you're uncomfortable with.
Okay.
But flooded means you go to fight or flight.
Okay.
At that triggered position, your behavior will alter if you don't understand what's going on. And when you go to fight or flight, I can actually tell you what the tendency is with a high degree of probability of what you're going to do. When I lay Mr. and Mrs. Smith's behaviors out before them, they look at each other and they go, whoa, that is exactly what's happening in our home. And so that's kind of the passion that I've had lately. It's been going on for about 9 months now.
Wow, fantastic.
Well, since we saw each other.
So did you hop back into this Harrison assessment at about that time, a year ago or so?
Yeah, this is when I started going back at it, and I went through all the credentials, and boy, I've done so many of them now, and it's actually what's blown up my corporate work. So at the corporate level, they're finding that this is so powerful to know what their employees are like, their behaviors. It doesn't matter your personality. If you're an introvert or an extrovert, that doesn't change. You can't train to that. So anytime you're doing personality traits, you can't coach to that. It's nice to know, it's fun to know, but there's no redeeming value to it.
Okay.
You have to know the emotional intelligence aspects, the behaviors, the traits, because those can be trained to. You can coach to a trait.
So you mentioned 12 paradoxes?
Right.
And this is part of the Harrison assessments?
That's correct.
And so your clients, your businesses, the people you work with take these assessments, and they're naturally, they fit into one of these 12?
No, it's not a fit in. See, that would be a personality thing.
Okay.
What it does is it gives me a rating of 2 to 10. Okay. So let's just do the tough and love. Okay, Rick?
Yeah.
So let's say you took the tough and the love. And I know that 6 is the middle. It's neutral. So it's a preference. It's based upon what's called enjoyment performance theory.
Okay.
Enjoyment performance theory simply says if you enjoy doing something, you'll do more of it. If you do more of it, you get better at it. If you get better at it, you usually get positive affirmations off of it. And if you get positive affirmations, you'll want to do it more.
Right.
Enjoyment performance theory. Now, the opposite's true. If you don't like doing something, you'll stop doing it. Your skills will atrophy. You won't get positive feedback, perhaps even negative, and therefore you'll like to do it even less. So what we know now, and I'm going to segue just a second, Rick, into hypnosis concepts, neuroscience.
Sure. Yep.
We know that all behavior is based on a belief you have about yourself. All beliefs are based upon experiences that you had when you were younger. If it's maladaptive, that means the experience you had when you were younger hasn't been processed. So I have 8 beliefs, 8 false narratives that I've worked on over the years.
You, Richard?
Yeah, me, Richard.
Okay.
I don't mean that I have 8 maladaptive beliefs. I probably do. I'm just suggesting these are the ones that come from my clients.
Okay.
So,
okay.
For example, I have no worth. I have no worth. It's my fault. I deserve this. I can't have trust and respect. I can't have love in my space. Those are subcortical narratives, all based upon experiences you had starting in utero. So a lot of the stuff in utero. We now know that unprocessed trauma in utero is a direct causation to cancer.
So say that again.
You bet. The trauma that we experience in utero, or the trauma our mother experiences in utero, or the trauma that the mother and the father are going through while you are in utero as a fetus because you have feelings, that's no longer arguable. Within moments of conception, you are a fetus and you start sensing the world around you. And if you sense the world around you, such as, let's say, the mother and the father, it's a one-night stand, just for argument's sake.
Sure.
And then the discussion comes up, do I keep the baby? Do I not keep the baby?
Sure.
Every emotion associated with that. Let's just say the dad got angry at the mom for getting pregnant.
Sure.
Just making it up, no one in specific.
Yep.
She now has a cortisol effect, right? She now has certain chemicals that get put into the fetus through the umbilical cord. Every cell that divides from that point on will carry that marker, that memory. This is who I am. They're mad at each other because of me.
How do they know this?
Through the research, there's a documentary called In Utero.
Okay.
Fascinating documentary because they can measure brainwaves. They can measure the chemical levels inside of the child.
Okay.
So, as I said, it's not arguable that the fetus has emotions.
Okay. And what comes with emotions are?
A belief that you have about yourself.
Okay.
So, and in hypnosis, as you know, when you go back in time to try to grab a time in their life where perhaps a traumatic event happened, the goal is to find the initial sensitizing event, which means is if there's an event that's happened to you that you've created these false beliefs about yourself, these false narratives. So if a guy is really tough, right? Hard-nosed, right? Why? What's the story he's telling himself? Because being a hard nose without the balance being soft goes against the very nature of man, which is to connect with another human being.
Right.
We're all hardwired to connect. We all want to have relationships. So if that's true, Rick, then why do we act harmfully to another human being?
Right. There's got to be there's, to your point earlier, there has to be a benefit from it.
Yeah. And I believe that there's always a good intent.
Right.
But the good intent might just be to take away pain.
Sure.
Every time let's put it into two lines. And this is where the research is coming from and why this paradox thing is so powerful. This is all behavior driven.
Okay.
We're concerned in the world right now with an opioid crisis, but only about 20 to 25% of the population ever becomes addicted to what is called an exogenous drug, outside in, shooting up with meth, drinking alcohol, etc.
Yep.
But 100% of society becomes addicted at some point in their life to an endogenous drug, a behavior addiction, sarcasm, criticism, controlling, bullying, pornography, and to a degree, a food addiction. Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense so far?
Yep. So the endogenous, did you say?
Yeah, endogenous is behavior driven, and that's 100% of society.
And that would be, so is the quote unquote addiction their own internal chemical bath that's released when they?
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. Okay.
So what the paradox report simply measures is, where are you balanced and where are you not? And where do you go when you're feeling stress, situational stress in your life? How do you handle it? Well, here's a predictive formula that we have. So Mr. Smith, when things aren't going well, this is what you're going to be blunt, or you're going to be dogmatic, or you're going to check out. You'll go into your man cave, and the wife's going to go, yeah, that's what he does.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the direction I've been going, because I want to be able to help people understand, one, it's possible to change. So if they come in my office, they want to change as a general rule. That's not always true.
Right.
But the idea is, if there's no hope, then it's just throwing money after something that's not worth it. And I want to give them hope that they can change, because I know how to find the answer to why they're acting the way they are. And if I can give them the hope and little small things that they can work on to change their habits, like maybe 1% per day, then they realize that's something I can chew off. I can take this elephant one bite at a time. But when you get into the mindset that you have to make these changes overnight, then the spouse becomes your worst enemy, because he or she becomes codependent on your behavior and pounds you when you don't change the way they think you should be changing. Notice that's an immaculate perception. It's their perception of how you should be changing.
I like it.
So that's the passion currently. Sorry it took so long, but it's a great measurement of balanced behavior versus imbalanced behavior.
Awesome. So 3 kind of follow-up questions, paths are popping up. One, like, where did the passion come? Like, what brought you back to this, a year ago, 9 months ago, that brought you to pull this back in? What have you seen in those 9 months? It sounds like you've been using this a lot and seeing some pretty cool ahas. Like, how does this guy know me from that?
Right.
And then the third thing is, moving forward for our listeners, what can they take from this and how can they apply this in their lives?
Okay. Question one was, how did I transition back?
Yeah. Like, where was what pulled you, or you heard about Harrison?
Yeah.
And if you're willing to be open, what about addictions? I'm hearing, is that kind of what brought you back to the Harrison thing?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Here's the yes, or here's the no. When people hear the word addiction, they automatically go to a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction, or
Sure.
something along that line.
Sure.
Notice it's always the outside in addiction.
Right.
I do work with those, but that's not my passion. That's not my forte, if you will. My belief, and this is what I want to be able to get in writing and publish, there isn't a single exogenous addiction that I know of, so alcohol, meth, cocaine, marijuana, you name it, that didn't start with a behavior addiction,
Okay.
an endogenous behavior.
Okay.
And so therefore, if I want to get to root cause, I have to go to that. Okay, let's take, fish, for example, a lot of times when people hear about hypnosis, they automatically can assume, or they go to the idea that, oh yeah, I had PTSD and that helped me. Hypnosis helped me with PTSD. Well, what PTSD is simply a post-trauma, and notice I said in utero we have trauma, a post-trauma reaction to something that happened yesterday,
Right.
year. And then you build up anxiety in yourself about what's going to happen tomorrow based upon what happened yesterday.
Sure.
Okay, so here's what's interesting. I just talked about yesterday, the stress from yesterday's experience that didn't get processed. Anxiety is all about tomorrow. So people who come in my office, 90% of them have anxiety issues.
Yep.
And they're in some depression issues. What they're doing is they're predicting tomorrow's behavior based upon yesterday's events, and they're
Yep.
doing it erroneously. That's called prediction error. That's what PTSD is, a prediction error about what's going to happen. What if I can interrupt the prediction? What if there's a way that anybody without a professional can start working through the process of interrupting the prediction error so they stop at trigger and they don't go to flood? Remember, trigger is simply an awareness of something that's going on.
Something's come in.
Yeah.
Right. Something's come into my awareness.
And a flood is acting out, fight or flight.
Yep. Okay.
So what if we could have, and this is where I was going from it, the Harrison, I realized, gave me predictability on paper. I could do it professionally, but it's really hard. Let me reframe that. It's a lot of work.
Takes longer.
And yes, and who in their right mind, I'm looking from a perspective here of myself, who wants to sit there and tell other people that they're broken?
Right.
Who wants to hear that? What the Harrison offered me to do is that I can show them on a piece of paper and they can go, yep, that's me. And I don't have to be a judge. I'm a neutral tour guide, if you will. And I'm able to walk them through the healing process rather than telling them that these are your problems, because they wouldn't be in front of me if they didn't have the problems.
I love that it moves from diagnosing to assessing.
And healing.
Right.
My emphasis would be there. I get why the other two are done.
Yeah.
But I don't need to look at you and go, okay, look it. You're so heavy on tough and you're really low on love. You're screwed up, buddy.
Right.
He already knows something's not working. Then when I do in paper, and I use the terms such as, you have a tendency to do this when you're under stress. Does that seem accurate? Yeah. How is that working for you? And then that person shares with me their experiences in that moment. And then I'm able to then teach them through emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and then if needed, regression. Then we're able to we're off at the races now, and there's a pattern and there's hope.
I love it. All right. And so in those 8-9 months you've been playing with it and getting a lot of ahas and holy cows, and have you been looking in our windows?
So let me go back and address that this way.
Sure.
Nothing different than what I've been doing, because the healing's always been the same. The time frame in which I do it is so much quicker.
Okay.
Because there's just so much more information, and they're much more receptive to their own graphs that they created than for me saying, Mr. Paddock, you're kind of rigid.
Yeah.
Your rigidity is creating problems for your wife because she's codependent on you. So now the wife is sitting there going, man, this guy's just beating us all up.
Sure. Yeah. Great shift. I love that.
Oh, thanks.
So before we hop into that third question is, how can our listeners take this info and apply it? And maybe that answer will come as a result of these questions I have for you. You said a couple of things that have come up in the podcast that I'm passionate about. I believe that mindfulness is so powerful, so effective on so many levels. One, because it's so versatile, so many people can learn and use it and apply it. And but I've never been a believer in regression and needing to find the ISE, the initial sensitizing event, or the root cause.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on what I just shared?
You're not the first person who shared it.
Yep.
Nor do I believe you'll be the last.
Right.
My approach to the regression is the following. And sometimes I'm doing a regression in just a normal conversation like you and I are having now.
Excellent. And I will do that as well.
A regression to me doesn't have to be associated with, so in my initial training, I was trained that you have to take them deep into a trance. It has to be followed this type of a script. And when they find that horrible event,
that one event,
they have to beat it out of them. They'll beat a bag, or they'll start cussing, and they're screaming, and they'll get angry about it, and they'll just kind of rip out that alien from their being. And to me, that's always been a hard understanding, because I'm a Christian, and I believe the healing process does come, the most effective ones that I've been associated with, through a belief in a higher power.
Okay.
And that higher power allows you to go through that process, and it can be done very sacredly, very special. And so when I do these, they're going in. Let me just, if it's okay, Rick, let me just walk you through a real simple illustration of how it works.
I'd love it.
So let's start with the mindfulness idea. Mindfulness is the ability to be singularly or narrowly focused. It's because we're so busy in life, we have so many things coming around us. Life is fast. Mindfulness is the ability to slow it down. So quick anecdotal story. I did a regression with a client not too long ago. She came in and told me, I need one. So,
sure? Give me one.
Because we've done one before. But it was about an hour of a mindfulness experience with her. And when it finished, I simply said, how are you doing? She said, fine. I said, how long do you think you've been sitting there? And she goes, I don't know, about an hour. And I said, yeah. And then she goes, I was guessing. It seemed like 10 minutes. I just knew it wasn't. So I was just trying to see if I got it right.
Yeah, that's funny.
And if you've been in an automobile accident, you'll remember every detail at slow motion speed, right? That's clock time. That means you are present. Stress is all about yesterday. Anxiety is all about tomorrow. I believe that God and that people in the flow or in acceptance live in the now. They live in today.
Yeah.
Mindfulness gives one the ability, or the permission, if you will, to live in the now. So I'm not worried about yesterday. I'm not concerned about tomorrow. I have today to work with. Okay, so there's my start.
Yep.
In a mindfulness scenario, I teach them to breathe. There's different kinds of breathings. There's not a wrong kind. There's not a right kind. What I teach them as a basic to start with is called a 4-4-8. It's balanced. 4 in, hold for 4, and then release slowly through your mouth, 8. So you breathe in through your nose to the abdomen as deep as you can go. Now, why? Why is breathing so powerful? we've learned that the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems are tied to your breathing. When I take a huge deep breath in, I'm going to balance both systems. And here's what they do. The parasympathetic's job is to simply regulate calm and relaxed. The sympathetic's job is to regulate alert and attentive. Now let's go to an extreme. The extreme on the parasympathetic, if it's acting out, I'm not just calmed and relaxed, I'm depressed. I'm horizontal. I'm comatose. If this extreme on the sympathetic is there, I'm hyper. I'm manic. I'm everywhere.
Yep.
I just described bipolar.
Yep.
So when you learn to breathe and regulate the body, so the first thing I do out of deep breath in is I imagine in my mind's eye a scale that gets balanced. And I've just balanced that scale. And anybody who wants to do it, you can do this with your eyes open. Just take a nice deep breath in through your nose, way down to your abdomen. Now hold it for 4 seconds or so. Now slowly release it, preferably through the mouth, but it's okay through the nose. And notice how calm you feel just with that moment. Okay, we're now coming into the present. We're no longer so concerned everywhere else. All right. Then what I teach them to do is to create a space, a container around their space. So I teach my clients to habit stack, which I don't want to get off on a tangent. But every morning they go to work and they turn the ignition on, which is a habit they're doing that's benign. They don't think about it. Their job is to sit back in the chair, in their seat, take a deep breath in, and then create a safe container around the cab in their truck or in their car. Okay, this is my safe place. And then I teach them to introduce or invite into their space their highest power. Bring in their God, whatever that power is to them. Bring him or her in. The next invitation they bring in is their best self, their highest self. And then I say, now create an anchor. And the anchor simply is, and anyone can do this, take your thumb and your index finger, the tips of them, and put them together like you're forming an O. Okay. And it's just in your lap. You create an anchor, and that's a reminder. Anytime today that you're stressed, anytime today you feel anxiety, touch your fingers together. And I usually make the sound. So when I touch them, it's like two magnets. So now I've got the anchor. My highest power is with me. My best self, my authentic self is with me. And then I have them go through this routine. And there's variations of this, but this is the basic. Today, I will be my best self at work with my clients. Today, I will be my best self as a spouse. Today, I will be my best self with my children. And then it's, and how does my best self act today? Then I take a deep breath in. Then I release. Put it in drive. And I go to work and I do not turn the radio on. I then bask in that presence of being balanced, in the presence of my God, my best self. And it's an 8-minute drive for me. So now I've spent 1 to 2 minutes before I put it into drive. I spend 8 minutes now allowing my mind to go where it needs to go. So today on the way to work, what was I thinking about? I'm going to be talking with Rick, and we're going to have this great experience. And my goal, I want to see myself as my best self with Rick today. So when I get to work, I walk in, I'm already balanced. Life is slowed down for me. It's not going really quick. I'm already in a good space. And I'm ready to address my clients, and I get some interesting experiences here.
I bet.
But during the day now, I'm also my best self as a husband. So what I do, what I think, what I see, I'm still trying to be my best self as a husband and a father. And then I have one unique title that I think everyone needs to have an opportunity to have, and that is I'm a grandfather.
I can't wait.
So that's how you could experience mindfulness. Now, my clients have to do it a minimum of twice a day. They do it again on their way home. The ignition goes in, they sit back, they do the entire process over again. So now that's a minimum of 2. Harvard Medical Center did the research on mindfulness. They took a group of rookies, have never heard or done mindfulness in the past, and they taught them how to do mindfulness, a 90-minute course. 90 minutes.
That's it.
That's it. After 6 weeks in mindfulness, if I didn't know we were going to go here, I'd have grabbed the research.
Yeah.
They could through an MRI, they could scan the brain.
MRI, yeah.
And they were able to determine that the gray matter on the amygdala, which is your fight or flight mechanism, decreased. 6 weeks, Rick, decreased. That means in 6 weeks' time, those people who participated in mindfulness every single day went into stress, fight or flight less by a statistically significant amount.
Incredible. So powerful. And what you and I see and our listeners see when we practice it, when our clients practice it, it's not difficult. Just do it regular, find a way to fit it in your life. Like you said, minimum twice a day. I tell my clients 15 seconds here, 30 seconds there. Research shows that it's better to do 5 3-minute mindfulness moments than 1 15-minute. And it happens. We feel it. We sense it. You're just talking about it and having us breathe, shifted our states.
Right.
It's so cool.
And if I could just throw one idea off that, Rick.
Yeah.
And I'm asking them to do it twice a day with the intent. And so I'll take the Harrison and we'll pick one trait in the Harrison that they want to balance. So let's do on I need to balance my love, for argument's sake. I will add, after they've done this for a couple of weeks, I will then start adding on top of that. So habit stacking on top of it.
Yep.
Okay, today, I want you to see yourself as someone who understands empathy, who works in the field of empathy. So how will I be my best empathetic self today? And the goal is to get 1% better on that specific trait, and you do it for a full week. The next week you switch, and then you kind of give yourself a grade at the end of the day. Notice that we're creating an awareness while this is going on. I got this idea from Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin came up with 13 virtues.
Yep.
And then he would work on a virtue a week and he'd grade himself every single day. And then he'd start over again. So what I'm asking my clients to do is at the end of the day, and I have them keep an awareness journal as well, but at the end of the day, just give yourself a 1 to 5. 1, I didn't have any empathy at all. I was my normal self.
Yep. No change.
A 2 would be at least a 1% increase. But if you're not aware of it, you don't act on it.
Yeah.
Too many people in life go through life asleep. They're not aware of what's going on. And the reality is they don't really want to wake up. It hurts.
Yeah.
When you wake up, you actually see what's going on. And sometimes it's not pleasant.
Yeah. So for those people where it isn't pleasant, how do you develop the habit of being mindful when and being aware when there's not a lot to be grateful for, to be aware of?
Well, I think that speaks to why I think regression needs to be used judiciously.
Okay.
I have some clients I've been with for 3 years who can't do it, but they can do mindfulness and they can do healing a little bit at a time. And the more they bring in their highest self and they bring in their highest power. So my authentic self, and this is a statement that I teach people to learn how to have. They have to understand their identity because their identity drives their behavior. So we work at chipping away the false identity or the sabotaging identity, such as I have no worth or I always have to be right, because if I'm not right, people will know that I really don't know. That's what bullies do. Bullies are closet cowards. And so if you ever run into a bully, you can rest assured that bully is covering for something. and they're telling themselves something that's not true about themselves, and it's manifesting them in a bad way, because a bully just wants to connect. They just don't know how. So what we teach them how to do is to start connecting with their authentic self a little at a time. And when you start breaking away and chiseling at that elephant, you start realizing that as you make these 1% improvements per day, that you've made a lot of progress at the end of a month, at the end of 2 months. It's learning to do it repetitiously. Oh, and this gets to another point. Someone will say, well, Dr. Himmer, what if I forget? And I go, yeah, you're going to. And they look at me like, really? So when I deal with people in addiction, I said, look, you're going to act out again. It's what you do with the acting out again that's going to make or break the scenario here. I fully expect you to act out. And by the way, I teach my clients that they all have to be perfect. Now, before you react to that, let me explain what it means. They all know what it means. I've studied this word. Remember, I come from a Christian background, and everyone wants you to be perfect like Christ, right? Or what would Jesus do?
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like a heretic, but in all fairness to the story, I can't do what Jesus did. I can't walk on the water. And if I'm at a party and we've run out of root beer, I can't go to the tap and fill up a mug and then make it mug root beer.
Right.
It's not going to happen, right? So for me to think that I'm going to be perfect isn't doable under the current definition of that word. So here's the definition of the word inside of my organization. Perfect is an experience or an event that is exactly what you need at that time to learn how to integrate with yourself, how to come closer to God. Perfect is a mistake that gets a retake.
I like it.
So, Rick, if you were my client in this moment and you say, well, Doc, what if I mess up? I said, exactly. It's fine. It's perfect. What do you do when you make a mistake? And they say, well, I get a retake, right? I said, yeah. And you get as many as you want. As long as your intention is to heal, as long as your drive is to heal, I'm going to be here. You may come back as often as you want. And in fairness to it, that's exactly what my God teaches. I get to make as many mistakes as I want, as long as my intent is to keep coming back and figuring out a way to stop acting addictively.
As long as the intent is I'm ready for another retake.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
I like it. So thank you for demonstrating love. And as you shared, what perfection is for you and in your organization.
No, being perfect. Perfectionism, that's a maladaptive behavior to hide your shame.
Not perfectionism, perfection.
Just being perfect.
Just being perfect. Okay.
I apologize. That's it, because I don't want someone to get this idea that perfection is the same thing as perfect, because perfectionism will harm an addicted mind who already thinks they have to be a perfectionist.
Okay.
Words have meaning, at least in my mind's eye.
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
All right. So being perfect.
Yes.
As you described that, made me think of one of my I don't like to say that I have idols. He wasn't an idol, but somebody I look up to, Mr. Rogers, and our listeners would know that he was a great role model in a number of ways. So there it is, the sound of spackling, and I was kind of hoping the spackle round wouldn't come up because there's so many more paths I want to follow, but the spackle round has started. So Richard, are you ready for the spackle round?
I am.
All right. So let's see. Spackle round, question number 1. Is there something that you don't believe now that you thought you always would?
Yes. Okay. When I was younger, I was an athlete, and people who were overweight, I always judged. But then again, so does society. Mm-hmm. So I was just as maladaptive and inappropriate as society. I always thought that fat people were lazy. I always thought that addicts were selfish and never wanted to change, and that's what they want. Through my studies and through experiences in my office, I've come to realize that people who have these challenges are fighting a false narrative from experiences that they did nothing to have. So, for example, there are some, let's just use the women, there's some women who are overweight who use their weight to protect themselves against a predator. So we're saying that they're somehow wrong with them after they've been sexually abused or raped when they were a young girl. Now that's really taking something out of context. That's judgment. I do not believe any of us have the right to judge another person's behavior because we don't know why they're acting that way. We only see the behavior, which is 10% of who they really are. It's a manifestation of a result of 90%, which is at the subcortical level of their beliefs, from their experiences. Remember, experiences drive belief, belief drives behavior. You only see behavior.
Yep.
So I look at someone and I see that they're overweight when I was a kid and I go, wow, they're just, and then you have these thoughts.
Yeah.
I look at someone now who's overweight and it's like, I want to give them a hug.
Yeah.
I know it's hard. And you're not lazy. You're fatigued. You get up in the morning and you start the battle, right? And you're already fighting the battle of who you are. I don't want to do this. By the time 5 o'clock comes around and you're leaving a stressful work because you've been ridiculed at work the whole time, you're utterly fatigued. And for some of those people, Rick, and I could speak to a number of these areas, that's rough. They need to be given the idea that there's hope. And the hope will give them that. And that's the one thing researchers have found. And this is interesting. I think it was out of Stanford. Stanford did some research on why certain religious organizations are more successful than other organizations at addictive healing. And everyone came back to the fact that the common thing that they have is that they have a God. Stanford, atheist type approach, says, no, it's not God, it's hope. I really don't care what you call it. The fact is that if you believe there's a chance that you can heal, if you believe there's a chance that you could find a higher level of happiness and well-being, then you're going to probably have more success working at it. So my belief now is everyone who acts maladaptively has a good intent, but they're in pain and they need to medicate that pain. And that's how they're medicating. They're predisposed to medicate in that fashion from their their family of origin, and then some certain genetic transfers up to we now know 11 generations.
Tell me about that.
Neuroscience has done the research. So I have a client who, after the first 2 visits, I looked at him and I furrowed my brow and I said, you act like you're a Holocaust survivor. Every symptom you've told me about is that you're a Holocaust survivor. And his eyes went big as saucers. And he goes, my grandparents are. I go, that's an epigenetic transfer of genes. So he now takes on the belief factor of his grandparents through that genetic transfer.
So epigenetics are?
The technical definition is means it sits on top of.
Okay.
Gene, the genetic disposition is, your makeup, right?
Yep.
The epi means what will express off that gene. So my wife's family has a predisposition to alcohol. That's in their family.
Yep.
But alcohol and sugar are the same addictive. They're cousins, right? It's the same line. Well, my wife, it's never expressed in my wife. She's never become an alcoholic, but that girl loves chocolate.
Interesting.
So it's just an expression of the gene. My family is predisposed to having to be right. And judging. We're good at judging, and we're good at having to be right. Well, it definitely expressed in my family, in me, right? So that's what it means.
Very interesting. You just put together some puzzle pieces for me. So I'm vaguely familiar with epigenetics. Dr. Will Horton was on. Dr. Will does a lot with addictions. He was on the podcast a few episodes back. But your connection between alcohol and sugars. So I know my grandpa was an alcoholic, and I'm sure there was a long line before him. And any friends or colleagues that were with me in New York the past weekend at HypnoBiz New York on the cruise saw that I'll have a drink or two and have some fun, but gratefully that's not a problem for me. I don't have to have it. But the sugars, that there's definitely, I'm like your wife, the sugar. So that stacking on the gene, that's how it manifests in my life. But I think an important point to make is, you said there's a predisposition. And that's all it is, a predisposition.
And that's different than a predetermination.
Exactly.
You don't have to act on that.
Yep.
So, but when it does get expressed, okay, and so what we now know is that the average young man is exposed to pornography at age 9.
Wow.
But not every young man becomes addicted to pornography.
Right.
In Vietnam, a high 90% were all on drugs during the Vietnam War, but only 10 to 20% of them stayed addicted when they got home, right? And that's what I'm arguing earlier, that only about 20 to 25% of society will move to that type of an exogenous outside-in addiction. The expression of the gene simply means that it is being expressed, but you can reverse the expression by changing your narrative, by changing how you view things. And that probably needs to be covered in a different episode.
Yeah, I do want to get to that. We'll have a second episode about changing the narrative, our own stories.
Right.
I love it. All right. So you brought up a challenge. Here's another spackle round question. You brought up, what you used to believe was that, fat people were lazy, or, all those judgments. Here's a spackle round question that just came to me. Speaking of challenge, what challenge have you had in the last 2, 3, 5 years that you're grateful for?
When I got married, I came into, but whenever anyone gets married, they come in with pre-existing conditions. When I got my belief, and it was a firm belief, because remember, I come from a long set of addicts who have to be right.
Okay.
I thought that my in-laws were much more screwed up than my wife's in-laws. So coming from that mindset, I used to play the role of a judge about their maladaptive behavior.
Yep.
In the last 5 years, as I've worked through this and developed techniques to how to expose the false narrative, because one of the things that I teach people to do is to ask a number of questions when they're triggered.
Okay.
That process has brought my wife and I so close together, so deep in a relationship with each other, because now when I act out inappropriately, one, it's a very short acting out, where it used to be quite long, quite dramatic. Now you wouldn't even know. And in the process of me working back and conflict resolving with my wife, I'm able to tell her the false stories I was telling myself. I said, okay, this is what happened. This is what I was telling myself. This is what I did. And this is how I'm going to address it in the future. Now, just for anyone who's listening to this, imagine your spouse walking up to you, a spouse who has to know it all, a spouse who always thinks he's right, says to you, honey, the last time we had an argument, you had nothing to do with it. It was all on my end. I was telling myself this story. And this story, I know where it came from. And I can tell you where it came from now. And I want to apologize for my behavior. Now, just as a side note, this is kind of a fun one. I've done this with my wife for some time now. In the last one, as I'm explaining it to her, she goes, yeah, and you told yourself this, and you told yourself this. She had 3 more that she threw at me. So I threw up the timeout sign. I said, stop. This is my awareness, not yours. Let me process 2 or 3 at a time. You're overloading me. I'm not saying you're wrong or right. I'm saying now's not the time for me to know I have a whole hell of a lot more to work on.
Let's just put those in our back pocket for now.
Not now, babe. She just smiled. She goes, okay, I just thought you might want to know.
That's awesome. That reminds me of a phrase that I tell those that are close to me socially or, relationally. If somebody's looking for advice, that in a relationship with your wife, there are 2 key phrases. Hold them close to you and pull them out often. You're right. I'm sorry. You're right. I'm sorry. And there's a half joke in that, because there's power in that, if you can just say that for all of us, whether it's your wife or your kids, your parents, it's okay to let them be right. And it's okay to apologize.
Let me throw something on that, Rick. My nephew taught me.
Okay.
He learned to say, you might be right. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Because then if you follow it up with, now I'm going to go back a step. In the documentary In Utero, one of the last comments made by the scientist, it was the most powerful of the entire documentary. He said, when a baby is understood, a baby is loved.
Mm.
Babies feel love when they feel understood. So if I say to my wife, Sherry, you might be right. Help me understand how you got there. That to me is the epitome of love.
Wow. Yeah. That's a great shift. And you might be right. Help me understand how you got there.
Yeah.
Help me
Something to that effect. Help me understand your position. Help me understand how I did this, whatever it might be. Keep in mind that when you seek understanding, and you do it neutrally, that's an expression of love.
Yeah.
It builds trust and respect, but you do not have to agree. I've had people tell me that I'm dead wrong, and they'll go on and on and on, and I'll listen to them and I'll ask lots of questions. And at the end, they'll go, well, I said, I really appreciate what you shared with me, but I don't agree with anything you've said. It might be at that level. I don't know that I've ever done that.
Sure.
But I don't have to agree with you to understand you.
Yeah.
And that's why I said it right.
Yeah.
And I don't have to agree with you to be friends. I know that if I spend enough time with you, we would not agree on everything.
Right.
But I also know you well enough that we'd really have fun doing it.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Well, on that note, let's wrap things up. I know we both have a lot to do. And so as we do wrap things up, first, I'm just wondering if you have, Richard, any parting words or request for our listeners, maybe even anything to offer. I'm not sure.
I can do both. So if you really want to find peace in your life, start asking the question, how would I act today if I was my best self?
How would I act today if I was my best self?
Yeah. If I was, and let me define best self for a second, because I do believe in a higher power. I believe God sees me in the now. He doesn't see me in my mistakes. He doesn't see me making mistakes tomorrow. He sees me with all the ability and the skill set to be happy and come back to him. If God sees me in the now, that I have all the abilities to create happiness and joy and well-being in my life, because I'm going to live with him again someday, that's my best self. So how do I act with Rick? How do I act with my wife, Sherry, or my children or grandchildren as my best self? What if you go into a conversation with your wife or your husband or your children saying, I will be neutral and I'll be my best self in the next 10 minutes with them. the change that you'll experience in that 10 minutes, you can taste. And what if you did that over and over and over again? So what I'd offer, and I don't know how to do it yet, so we can figure out the details.
Yeah.
I have a white paper that I've written on emotional intelligence that covers a couple of these steps. I'm very willing to give that away. I can put it on my website, or I could give it to you and you could pass it out. I'm fine with that.
We'll figure it out. Listeners, just go to mindflipping.com, episode number 81, Dr. Richard Himmer, and you'll find the way to get that white paper. It might be on Richard's site. It might be right there on mindflipping.com, but that's a generous offer. That's fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, it's been a great conversation. I love how we ended it on the notes of understanding. You might be right. Help me understand, and how that's an expression of love. And so I want to end it with my truth, and that's that I love you, Richard, and I appreciate you.
I really appreciate that, and the feelings are reciprocated, Rick.
Thank you. And listeners, I love you, and thanks for listening.